Good afternoon, welcome. My guest today is someone who's been in so many different industries. Currently, I'm trying to count them all. You've been in education, you've been in healthcare at one point, you've been in business, and currently the head of neurodivergent charity AP Cymru. It is Sean Allen. Sean, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very well. I should probably slightly nuance that. I'm head of learning and development. Otherwise, Karen at AP Cymru will have my guts for garters. So
It's a very important role at the company, of course.
definitely.
Now, you're a very busy man. You're also working with Penybont FC in the Welsh League. So, I suppose first and foremost, how did you get into working with AP Cymru?
I started volunteering there in 2011. At the time, I was a full-time primary school teacher, and I think I quickly realised within that kind of formal educational setting that sport and PE, as much as I love them, aren't fully inclusive for all children. So I still can't remember, I don't think Karen can either, what the connection was, but someone introduced us. I offered to run some physical literacy sessions over the summer halls for the children that the charity worked with. So those children ranged from around the age of around 5 to 14, 15. I did the physical literacy sessions for them, stayed in touch, and the relationship just grew from there, really.
So you'd mentioned physical literacy. We'll get into that because that's something you feel very deeply about.
I do.
But when you were initially in sort of education, because you've been all over the world in your job, did you ever notice any neurodiverse policies in school when you first started off?
Not at the time, no. Neurodivergence as a kind of catch-all term, I would say, I've only really been introduced to in the last 5 years. So it's although it's ultimately always existed within an educational framework in terms of neurodivergent young people, I don't think, you had your ALN, you had your kind of SENCO, but neurodivergence was never really spoken about, even though you could identify and recognise ND children. There was no real kind of formal term, I guess, at that time, but there is now.
And where would you say the whole conversation around it is now compared to where you started out?
Far more positive in terms of recognising differences, not a deficit. Would it be more amenable to all neurotypes if, rather than speaking about conditions, we spoke about the challenges? Because we talk as a charity and as an organisation about working with the person and not the condition, and yet we sometimes fall into the trap of talking about the conditions and not the person. So I sometimes think, especially when I'm delivering to young people, should we even introduce terms such as autism, OCD, ADHD, or should we just talk about the challenges that some people in society face?
Well, let's expand upon that, because you still work in a school setting as well down in Monmouth. And what would you say the main challenges that particularly young people are facing, and particularly in sport at the moment, with regards to the ND movement?
I'd say a big thing in education is still awareness. Not so much my school, because I'm there now talking about it, but in my experience, often I'll go into schools and I'll deliver, and when I'm talking to them, a lot of them, neurodivergence is quite a new concept. And to me, it should form the bedrock of any educational training, because statistically 1 in 5 people have got a diagnosis of being neurodivergent, but that's a formal diagnosis, so that's as low as it can be, 1 in 5. As a charity, we work off more 1 in 3. So if you've got 30 children in your class, there's a likelihood that 10 are likely to be neurodivergent. So if you're not aware of the types of challenges that these youngsters face, you're basically saying that a third of my class won't be given everything that they need in that environment to thrive. And it's even more noticeable, I would say, in sport, because as much as I love sport and I love PE, a lot of the conditions that we talk about and the associated challenges are really brought to the fore in that type of competitive environment.
Well, let's talk about sport then, because it's a really tough, really competitive environment. And some say people with neurodiverse conditions thrives. Others say it's a bit of a hindrance at times. What side of the fence are you on with regards to that debate?
So for those of you that don't know what physical literacy is, a kind of working definition, an easy way to understand it is you're giving people, young people in school, the skill, the confidence and the competence to express themselves physically. So someone that's physically literate is more likely to gravitate towards sport because they're going to want to display how literate they are in the physical kind of realm. That is brilliant, and that is fully inclusive because you're taking every child where they are and you're moving them on kind of in safe increments. What it's not doing is putting a ball in the middle of them and saying, right, we're going to have a game. Half of you are going to lose, half of you are going to win. You've got to think, I suppose, take it back to basics. What, as a school, are you trying to achieve? And I would say it's not just about exams. It's about experiences, and it's about building positive memories for these kids so that whether it's numeracy, literacy, I wouldn't have done my job if kids leave primary school never wanting to read another book again. They've got to play rugby, they've got to play football because it's part of the curriculum. But if we're doing our job as educators, they should then want to continue playing sport like throughout their adult lives as well.
So imagine now you are, a child in school who's suffering with, I don't know, ADHD or autism, and maybe sport isn't necessarily your preferred area of expertise. As someone who develops those frameworks, how do you go about integrating them into the game in a way that is truly inclusive?
So it's really challenging with a lot of the sports which are still in the curriculum, like things like football, rugby, cricket, these types of sports. There's other sports which it's easier, I would say, to make them more inclusive. But if you think about an autistic young person, often they really struggle in a group dynamic. Like I used an example to a friend earlier, like turn taking. So they'll internalize turn taking and they won't necessarily pick up on the social cues of when it's their turn to speak, when it's their turn to listen. So 1-to-1, they've got that challenge with one other person. Put them in a group of 10 people and all of a sudden they're overwhelmed because there's 10 other people who are also vying for that available time. When do I talk? When do I this type of thing, right? So if you think about that as a game, well, you could build into the football program constant 1v1s. So they've got ball time, they've got huge amount of ball time because they're either going to be out of possession trying to win it back or in possession with the ball at their feet. Obviously, a neurodivergent brain can often be overwhelmed and they can often take in more information within their environment. So I won't, or as much as possible, I won't have games lessons in noisy, busy environments when the groundskeeper's cutting the grass next to them because they're trying to focus on, and that could, it could be not just autism, ADHD. They're trying to focus on me, but they're being bombarded with all this other information within the environment. So I'm almost setting them up to fail because then they get told off for not listening. And actually they are trying harder than probably everyone else to listen, but they're just taking in more information within the environment. The sensory overwhelm of I've got my personal space. I'm now walking onto a dirty, muddy, grassy pitch where someone who I haven't allowed into my personal space comes and smashes me because I'm holding a rugby ball in my hands.
Yeah.
So why would I put that child through that every single week? It's almost cruel.
Yeah.
So build into that. There could be another option for pupils that really struggle in that environment. And you're not saying they have to be in that, you're basically just offering it to them. But again, like I've got a neurodivergent child in my class who is involved in the rugby, never makes a tackle, never catches the ball. So I say to him, right, your job, buddy, I want you to almost just track. So come behind your defensive line. So you're always 10 meters behind and you're just telling people where the danger is. So he does that. He finishes the game and he genuinely, you can just tell by the way he feels like he's taken an active part in the game.
Yeah.
And he hasn't made a tackle and he hasn't caught the ball. But ultimately, why would I make him catch the ball if that means he's going to get hit by another child, which is going to upset him for the rest of the day? And then he can't focus in a numeracy session because he's still thinking about the game session and he's getting told off in numeracy for not listening. It
is so tough as well in an environment like sport. We did have a brief chat and one thing you said that really stood out was sport is not designed for neurodivergent people. It is, in a way, designed for neurotypical people. So does do the needs of certain individuals get lost sometimes in that will to win at a competitive level? I think they do. But you could have this conversation really about sport and competitive sport, couldn't you? About everything. So
we've had a child in school recently diagnosed autistic, really struggles in music lessons because of the overwhelm. Mum and dad are really supportive, but several times now the child's got up in the middle of a music lesson, gone to all the musical instruments, started playing them all, banging them all, this type of thing, right? Child gets into trouble because they're doing something they shouldn't be doing within that environment. Mum and dad are saying, well, you should be creating an environment that essentially allows my child to be their authentic self. But again, it's nuanced, because if the same child is with their parents and says, I want to walk down the middle of the road, you wouldn't let them. But you could turn that around and say, well, you're not allowing the person to be their authentic. So, like I said, it's so situational. So what I've suggested within school is that child can't just get up and play those instruments when they want, because that's not an acceptable way of behaving within that environment. However, if the child does feel the need to play an instrument, there's a little breakout room, and there's a xylophone, there's a glockenspiel, there's a triangle, there's instruments where they can go in a quiet space and play them, and then come back into this environment. So often it's just about thinking creatively and thinking, how can you still give the child what they need without it negatively impacting everyone else within that environment. So you think about sport and football. Again, I'm neurodivergent. I want to play football. But every time I say I want to play in the school team, I pick the ball up. You can't really play football then, because it's a rule within football that you can't pick the ball up. However, I could create a game that wasn't as competitive, which allowed that child to pick up the ball and still to play. So it's such a hard one, because I struggle sometimes saying this in training because I don't want to lose people, the ND training. It's almost virtually, I think, impossible to create an environment that is 100% inclusive 100% of the time, because you don't know who's going to walk through the door.
And do you think, to a degree, it's more about creating, because again, you mentioned authentic self. Do you think it's about giving potential players or, future athletes or what have you, the ability to decide if they want their authentic self to be part of themselves in a sporting context?
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny you've said that, because when I started to deliver the training, this is like 3 years ago, I said one of our goals is to create an environment where everyone could be their authentic self. But I've changed that now so that I'm creating conditions that allow everyone to be their authentic self if they want to, which is, it's a subtle distinction, but it's massive. Because you might still not want to reveal certain aspects of yourself within that environment, and I'm not saying you've got to.
Let's discuss as well this thing called exercise snacking. Tell me more about this, because I was really interested when I read about this.
So, funny enough, I've just bought a book, and I'm pretty sure it was in that. I read it, it's called the 1 minute workout, which is a bit of a misnomer, but it's all about, again, exercise snacking. So the way our concentration spans are going as a society anyway, it's worse and worse and worse. So primary school children in the main aren't going through maturation, so they're not developing adolescence and things like, again, you can't have a blanket rule, but it usually comes in high school when puberty starts and things like that. So ultimately, youngsters don't sweat and don't perspire and in the same way as teenagers and adults do. So exercise snacking means if you've got 1 hour within your curriculum every week of PE, 10, 15 minutes is lost both ends getting them changed. So already you're down to 30 minutes. So whether it would be a case of allowing children on those days to wear the school tracksuit or, the school hoodie and tracky bottoms, so they haven't got to change. But rather than having a 1 hour, I think it would be far better to have 4 15-minute bursts, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when it's physical literacy, functional movements. You're getting children to enjoy being physically active, as opposed to, and because the sport can come later. If you think of it, it's like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, but if you apply that to like a sporting principle, or sporting perspective, if you haven't got physical literacy, you're never ever going to realize your physical potential in sport. So listen to them.
Wise words. Sean Allen, thank you very much for taking part. Can the listeners have some information of where to find your charity, by the way?
Yeah. So geographically, we're based in Taftswell. We work with any families pre, post, or who are along the diagnostic pathway. So you don't need, you don't need to have a formal diagnosis to access all our services. It's an amazing charity full of amazing people. Karen, the chief exec, she's a one-off. You've got to meet her because she's just the most wonderful person. Our website is apcymru.org.uk. I'm sure we're on Insta, AP Cymru. But yeah, I mean, obviously you've got my contact details as well. So if anyone seeing this wanted to reach out to you and you could put them in touch with me, that's absolutely fine, Ethan, as well.
I'm always available. Thank you very much, guys.